The cafe was humming with a late-morning crowd, young professionals tapping away on laptops, tourists snapping photos of the exposed brick walls, and locals tucked away in their familiar corners. Behind the counter, Jade Robinson moved with practiced ease, her dark curls tied back and her smile polite but distant. She had learned long ago that charm was expected of her, but not sincerity. Working in this upscale cafe just blocks away from the financial district, she had mastered the art of invisibility, just enough presence to serve, but never enough to be remembered. It was nearing 11 a.m. when the door chimed, and a little girl stepped in. She looked about 8, dressed in a crisp navy blue dress with a matching coat, her golden curls perfectly in place. Her pale fingers clutched the handle of a white cane, tapping gently against the floor as she walked in hesitant, measured steps. The atmosphere shifted subtly. A few patrons glanced up. Jade noticed the way the girl's brow furrowed with concentration, the slight tremble in her lower lip as if she were doing everything she could not to cry. She made it to a small table in the corner, and after a long pause, pulled out the chair and sat down. No adult followed. No one joined her. Jade frowned. She glanced at her manager, who was focused on an iPad, oblivious. Quietly, Jade filled a glass of water and approached the table. "Hi there," she said gently. "Would you like some help?" The girl startled slightly but nodded. "I think my mom is late. She told me to wait here." Jade set the water down and crouched beside her, keeping her tone calm and warm. "It's okay. Do you want something to drink while you wait? Maybe some juice." The girl considered. "Apple juice. If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. I'll be right back," Jade said, standing up. Behind her, the manager's voice cut through sharply. "Jade, what are you doing? That table's reserved." Jade turned, lowering her voice. "She's alone. She's blind. I think her mom is running late. Not your concern." "Serve the couple at the window," he snapped. Jade hesitated. She looked back at the girl, whose head had dropped slightly. She couldn't ignore this. Not today. A few minutes later, Jade returned with a glass of juice and a small plate of warm scones, technically off menu at that hour, but she'd convinced the kitchen to make an exception. She sat across from the girl. "I'm Jade," she said, offering her hand, even though she wasn't sure if the girl could see it. "I'm Clara," the girl replied, reaching out to shake it with quiet formality. "Thank you for helping me. Most people don't." Jade smiled softly. "People can be in a rush. That doesn't mean you should be invisible." Clara tilted her head slightly. "You talk like my teacher at the school for the blind. She says I see better than most people with eyes." Jade laughed, but there was a weight behind Clara's words that made her pause. "Your teacher sounds smart." For the next 15 minutes they talked. About Clara's school, about her dog she wasn't allowed to bring today, about how all apple juice tastes different depending on where you get it. She was sharp, curious, and had a dry wit that surfaced when she relaxed. Jade didn't notice the time. Not until the door opened again, and silence swept through the cafe like a cold wind. Victoria Bennett had arrived. The aura around her was unmistakable. Designer black coat, heels clicking like punctuation marks, hair pulled back in a sleek twist. She moved with a precision that seemed almost unnatural, like every step was calibrated. Her eyes locked onto Clara, then flicked to Jade. "What are you doing sitting with my daughter?" The question wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like glass. Jade stood quickly, instinctively. She was alone. She wasn't alone," Victoria interrupted. "She was waiting." Clara looked uneasy now, her fingers gripping her cane tighter. "She was kind to me, Mama." Victoria's gaze didn't soften. "Kindness doesn't excuse overstepping." Jade swallowed the retort rising in her throat. This woman was clearly powerful and likely not used to being challenged. "I'm sorry," Jade said evenly. "I just didn't want her to feel forgotten." There was a flicker in Victoria's expression, something that passed so quickly Jade wasn't sure she'd seen it. Then she turned away, placing a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "Come, darling. We have a meeting." As they walked out, Clara glanced back over her shoulder, sightless eyes searching the room like she could still see Jade somehow. Jade raised a hand in a small wave. When the door closed behind them, the cafe resumed its buzz, but Jade stood frozen for a moment. Something had passed between her and that girl, something quiet and inexplicably important. She didn't know that this moment, this small act of human decency, had been observed, and that in less than 24 hours, her life would be changed forever. Jade hadn't expected the woman to return. She was halfway through her shift the next morning, mindlessly restocking the sugar packets near the espresso machine, when the cafe's glass door opened with the same sharp chime. A brief chill passed through as the air shifted. She turned instinctively and froze. Victoria Bennett stood there, unmistakable in her tailored gray suit and the precise elegance of her posture. Her presence didn't just command attention, it consumed it. She wasn't dressed like someone passing through for a morning coffee. She was dressed like someone with purpose, with calculation. Jade quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out from behind the counter, unsure whether to greet her or pretend she hadn't seen her. But the decision was made for her. "Miss Robinson," Victoria said, her voice smooth but cool. "I wonder if we might speak privately." Jade blinked. "Of course. There's a bench just outside." "No," Victoria interrupted, glancing around with faint distaste. "Somewhere more suitable. There's a quiet room in the back, I believe, for staff breaks." It wasn't a question. Jade hesitated. Her manager was at the far end of the bar, clearly catching the exchange, but saying nothing. Maybe even afraid. She nodded slowly. "This way." The break room was barely large enough for a table and 2 chairs, with faded motivational posters curling at the corners on the walls. Jade gestured toward a seat and remained standing, her arms crossed in a half-defensive pose. Victoria sat, crossing her legs neatly. She placed a slim leather portfolio on the table and looked up at Jade with the quiet, unnerving intensity of someone who had long since mastered silence as a weapon. "I want to offer you a job," she said without preamble. Jade stared at her. "Excuse me? You made an impression on my daughter. That's rare. Clara doesn't respond well to strangers, especially adults. But she spoke about you last night. At length." Jade was still processing the sentence when Victoria continued, her tone devoid of warmth but not entirely hostile. "I'm in need of a full-time nanny. Someone reliable, intelligent, discreet. Clara requires more than just basic care. She needs emotional stability, consistency, someone who won't patronize or underestimate her." "I don't." Jade shook her head slightly. "I'm a barista. I don't have experience." "Your degree is in literature, yes?" Victoria interrupted. "And psychology minor. You worked with children during your time in university in a reading program. You're fluent in French and conversational in ASL. You've moved 5 times in the last 7 years and had 9 different jobs." Jade's breath caught. "I run background checks, Miss Robinson. Thorough ones." She didn't know whether to be flattered or terrified. "You're overqualified for this place. But you stay because it's safe. Because it asks little of you. Because it doesn't require you to look forward." There was no cruelty in the words. That's what made them worse. Victoria leaned back slightly, watching her. "I need someone who understands what it means to carry invisible weight. You strike me as someone who does." Jade felt the walls closing in. Her first instinct was to run, to laugh it off, to pretend this was absurd. But underneath the shock, something in her stirred, a slow, reluctant hum. Clara's face surfaced in her memory. The way she had clutched her cane. The quiet courage it must take to exist in a world built for eyes. "You trust me?" Jade said finally. "You don't know me." "I don't need to know you," Victoria replied. "I've already assessed what matters. What you did yesterday, you didn't do it to be seen. You did it because you could not. That's exactly the kind of person my daughter needs." Silence hung between them like a tightrope. Then, quietly, Jade asked, "Why not hire a professional? Someone with credentials, a resume full of private families and child development seminars." Victoria's eyes didn't waver. "Because professionals are predictable. And often performative. I don't need perfection. I need sincerity. Jade lowered herself into the opposite chair, still feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. What would this job involve? Living in your own quarters, full benefits, travel occasionally, but most of all, being present, engaged, honest. Clara, she's extraordinary, Jade said softly. She is, Victoria agreed, but her expression flickered again, a shadow passing through. And she's vulnerable in ways most people can't understand. Her blindness isn't the greatest threat to her well-being. People are. Jade felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't the offer itself, it was the weight behind it. The loneliness, the protectiveness, the need. And maybe, just maybe, the opportunity to matter again. She exhaled slowly. Can I have 24 hours to think about it? Victoria nodded, already standing. Of course. But I'll need your answer by tomorrow. Clara gets attached quickly. I won't risk another disappointment. As Victoria left the room, her footsteps sharp and assured, Jade remained seated, heart thudding against her ribs. The room smelled like old coffee and lemon sanitizer, but the air felt electric, charged with something larger than herself. Outside, the cafe moved on as if nothing had happened, as if her world hadn't just shifted on its axis. And Jade, still unsure whether she was walking into a new chapter or a storm, realized she was no longer afraid. She was curious. And that was more dangerous than fear. That night, Jade didn't sleep. She lay curled on her second-hand mattress in the shoebox apartment she had called home for the past 3 years, the sounds of the city weaving in through cracked windows, a siren in the distance, the soft hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. She knew this soundtrack like muscle memory. It had always been there, unmoving, unsentimental. Like her life lately. The walls, covered in aging prints of literary quotes and postcards she'd never mailed, seemed to press in. Each item around her, the chipped mug by the sink, the lopsided bookshelf with her dog-eared poetry volumes, suddenly looked like artifacts from someone else's existence. A version of herself built on quiet resignation. Victoria's words echoed in her head like a mantra. I don't need perfection. I need sincerity. Jade had expected to feel insulted, accused of hiding in smallness. But instead, she felt seen. Exposed in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be for a long time. By morning, she didn't have an answer, so much as a gravitational pull. She arrived at the Bennett estate with damp palms and too many questions. The iron gates parted silently as she approached. The air smelled different here, cleaner, heavier with pine, and expensive landscaping. The house loomed in muted tones of stone and shadow, not ostentatious, but undeniably powerful. Like its owner. Victoria opened the door herself. No staff. No fanfare. You came, she said, not surprised. Just observant. I still don't know if I'm saying yes, Jade replied quietly. I know. She stepped aside, letting her in. The foyer was minimalist. Dark wood, polished floors, quiet lighting. Every line in the architecture suggested control. Jade followed her through the halls, their footsteps almost swallowed by the silence. Then Victoria paused before a closed door. Clara's with her music teacher. We have a moment. Jade nodded, still unsure what she was walking into. They entered what looked like a study, though there were no books, just files, abstract art, and a massive desk with no paper out of place. Victoria gestured to a chair, and Jade sat, heart ticking like a metronome. I want to offer you something else, Victoria said, settling into the chair across from her. Not instead of the job alongside it. Jade narrowed her eyes. I'm listening. You said something yesterday. About Clara being extraordinary. Jade nodded slowly. I don't disagree. But there's more to it than intelligence or curiosity. She hesitated, and for a brief moment, the composed mask cracked. Her gaze flickered, softened. There's something happening to her. Something I can't explain. At least not in any language most people would accept. Jade blinked. You mean psychologically? No, Victoria said quietly. Not exactly. I mean something else. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a slim leather folder, sliding it across the desk. Jade opened it, half expecting legal documents. Instead, she found photographs. Dozens of them. All of Clara. In different rooms, doing ordinary things. But in each one, there was something off. A blur in the background.
A shape that didn't make sense.
A mirror that reflected something or someone that wasn't there. Jade looked up sharply. What is this? I don't know, Victoria said. That's why I'm showing you. Jade's fingers trembled as she held a photo closer. In one, Clara sat at the piano, hands frozen mid-note. Behind her, in the mirror, a shadow. Human-shaped but featureless.
Wrong.
I've had the photos analyzed. Nothing conclusive. I've checked the mirrors, the lighting. Everything should be normal. But it's not. And Clara, she talks to it. Jade's mouth went dry. To the shadow? To something. She doesn't describe it clearly. Says it doesn't like names. And you believe her? Victoria's voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Jade's stomach twist. I believe what I see. And I believe in protecting my daughter, even if I don't understand what I'm protecting her from. Jade couldn't look away from the photo. I don't want someone who'll dismiss her. I don't want someone who'll pathologize it or pretend it's imaginary just to ease their own discomfort. A long silence stretched between them. Victoria leaned forward. I'm not asking you to investigate. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to be with her, to pay attention, to trust what you see and what you don't. Jade closed the folder slowly. She felt the familiar chill of fear crawling up her spine, but beneath it, deeper, was something else. Recognition. Something had been off the moment she met Clara, but it hadn't felt threatening. It had felt wounded, ancient, like an echo clinging to a child too sensitive to ignore it. And now here was Victoria, offering not just a job, but a place in a secret too strange to name and too real to deny. Jade looked her in the eye. If I say yes, I need you to promise me something. Victoria didn't blink. Go on. That if I feel something's wrong, truly wrong, you'll listen to me. Not as your employee, as someone who knows. The older woman's jaw tightened, but she nodded once, solemnly.
Deal.
Jade exhaled. The decision had already made itself, somewhere in the quiet hours of the night. She reached for the folder again, not for evidence, but for initiation. I'll start tomorrow. And for the first time since they met, Victoria smiled. Not with her mouth, but with the smallest shift in the muscles around her eyes. A gesture of guarded relief, of knowing she had just bound someone to a path they could not walk away from. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Somewhere inside the house, faint piano notes echoed, and Jade knew the real story hadn't begun yet. It was waiting, in the silence, in the shadows, in Clara. Jade moved into the Bennett estate on a rainy Thursday. It wasn't in the original agreement, but Victoria insisted. Clara needs consistency, she had said, though her voice carried something underneath, a taut urgency she didn't explain. So Jade packed what little she had into 2 suitcases and a worn-out canvas tote and found herself occupying a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed felt like it could swallow her whole. The walls were lined with art she didn't understand, pieces both abstract and bleak, as though someone had painted the exact moment a memory started to rot. From the first night, something was off. There was a subtle hum in the house that didn't come from electricity. It lived under the skin of silence, present in the creak of floorboards that hadn't been stepped on, in the soft, unprovoked flicker of lights, in the way certain doors seemed to resist being opened. Clara, too, shifted in tone. In the daylight, she remained poised, curious, sweet in a way that made you ache. But in the twilight hours, as the house exhaled and its walls seemed to lean in, she changed. Her eyes grew distant.
She spoke less.
She drew symbols Jade didn't recognize, circles within circles, eyes without faces, keys without locks. One night, Jade found her standing barefoot in the hallway outside her room, staring at nothing. "Clara?" she asked softly. The girl didn't startle. Her voice was a murmur. He doesn't like closed doors.
Who?
Clara tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something Jade couldn't hear. Then she turned and walked away. Jade didn't sleep that night. She started keeping a journal, not just of Clara's behaviors, but of the house itself. Objects moved subtly, then suddenly. A hairbrush no longer in the bathroom. A photo frame turned to face the wall. Once, the grandfather clock in the hall rang at 3:17 a.m., though it had no pendulum and was supposedly broken. But what haunted her more than the phenomena was the feeling that she was being studied, weighed, as if the house, or something within it, was testing her threshold. The library became her sanctuary, partly because Clara loved it and partly because it seemed to resist the rest of the house's sickness. It smelled of cedar and dust, of forgotten wisdom. Books lined the walls like sentries. Some were recent. Others were older than the building itself. One evening, while Clara napped in the reading nook, Jade explored. She noticed a book, The Body as Door, misplaced on a shelf labeled European Folklore. Its spine was cracked. Inside were notes written in a hand that wasn't Victoria's. The margins held feverish scrawls. The veil thins near children. Mirrors are not passive. Some guardians are chosen. Others are claimed. The more she read, the colder she felt. The book described entities, not spirits in the traditional sense, but echoes from before, beings that nested in trauma and rooted themselves in the psyches of the sensitive. They didn't possess. They entangled. Jade closed the book, heart pounding. She began watching Clara more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of deepening concern. The child was changing in ways that didn't fit any psychological framework. She whispered to empty corners. She asked Jade to walk a specific number of steps between rooms. She insisted the mirrors in her room be covered at night. Then came the breaking point. It was early morning. Fog clung to the windows like wet gauze. Jade woke to the sound of distant humming, a melody unfamiliar, wrong in its dissonance. Following it, she found herself outside Victoria's study, a room always locked. Except this time, it wasn't. The door stood slightly ajar. No light spilled out, but the humming came from within. She pushed it open, hesitating. Inside, the room was transformed. The desk had been moved. Candles sat in a precise circle on the floor, wax pooled in unsettling shapes. At the center was a mirror, not hanging, but propped, its glass warped like it was holding back water. Jade stepped closer. The reflection did not match the room. There was no desk, no candles, just darkness. And then movement. A figure stepped forward in the reflection. Not Clara, not Victoria. A shape that looked human only in outline. Its face, if it had one, was layered with shifting features, as though it cycled through identities, searching for the right one. Jade staggered back, knocking over a candle. Behind her, Victoria stood in the doorway. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," she said, her voice unreadable. Jade stared, heart crashing against her ribs. "What is it?" Victoria stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "It's the reason you're here." Jade shook her head. "You said Clara needed." "She does. But what she needs protection from isn't out there. It's in here." Victoria's eyes glinted with something too old to be panic and too raw to be calm. "This house, it's not haunted in the way you think. It's bonded. To our bloodline. To her." And now, her gaze dropped to the candle Jade had disturbed. "To you." Jade felt the room press in, like it was breathing around her. "I didn't agree to this," she said, voice brittle. "You did," Victoria replied. "The moment you saw her. You felt it. The connection. That wasn't chance." Jade turned to the mirror again. The figure was gone, but the darkness lingered, like a waiting mouth. Something inside her knew. There was no walking away now. Not without consequence. Victoria placed a hand on her shoulder, not unkindly. "Secrets rot in silence. And this one has already festered too long." Jade nodded slowly. Not in agreement, but in understanding. The house had secrets. Clara had secrets. And now they lived inside her too. And whatever was coming next, it wouldn't wait for permission. Jade stopped asking if this was real. Reality had bent too many times, in too many subtle ways, to still feel like a question with one answer. What mattered now wasn't whether the dark presence in the mirror was imagined or literal, but that Clara believed in it. That Victoria spoke to it. That Jade could feel it watching her in the walls, listening for weakness in her voice when she spoke Clara's name. The nights stretched longer. Clara no longer slept through them. She would knock softly at Jade's door sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., never frantic, never scared, just alert, as if summoned by some silent agreement she hadn't told Jade about. "We shouldn't be alone," she'd whisper. One night, Jade asked, "Why not?" Clara didn't answer immediately. She sat at the edge of the bed, her bare feet not quite touching the floor, tracing a pattern into the blanket that looked eerily like the one Jade had seen in the study. Circles within circles, spirals, lines that met but never crossed. "Because it knows who's weak," Clara said finally. "And it likes to play first." Jade didn't sleep after that. She turned to the journals again, the ones she'd found tucked away in the back of the library, clearly belonging to Victoria, though none were dated. They didn't read like research or documentation. They were confessions. A mind unraveling slowly, but with precision. Descriptions of dreams that weren't hers. Memories that came through Clara. Events that replayed at 3:17 a.m. every night in the attic, exactly the same each time, though no one had entered. And then a name, Nathaniel. Jade thought at first it was a hallucination. But the name appeared over and over, scrawled with increasing desperation. Nathaniel knows. Nathaniel lied. Clara is not his first. The truth unraveled not like a thread, but like a rupture. Victoria hadn't told her everything. Clara's father had vanished when Clara was 3. That much Jade had assumed from the silence around him. But the deeper reality was stranger. Nathaniel Bennett had not vanished in the traditional sense. He had dissolved. His presence had been erased, not just from photographs but from memories. Neighbors remembered Victoria being pregnant, but no one remembered a man living in the house. No paperwork existed. No marriage license. No death certificate. And yet, in one of the journals, Victoria had written something that stopped Jade cold. He made the pact before Clara was born. He offered something he did not own. The house kept the dead. Now it is hers. The words had a quiet terror to them. Jade read them again and again, hoping their meaning would change. They didn't. Jade began to see Victoria differently. Not as a manipulator, but as a mother unraveling under the weight of ancient consequences. She hadn't brought Jade here to save Clara from a spirit. She'd brought her here because she didn't know how to protect her anymore. And now Jade was part of the equation. It was during a storm that the final truth surfaced. The house had gone dark. Not from the storm, electrical outages were common, but from something deeper. The walls pulsed with a strange warmth. The mirrors steamed, though there was no heat. And Clara, ever composed, stood in the hallway staring into the full-length mirror that had somehow returned to her room. It had been locked away in the basement. Jade was sure of it. "I see him now," Clara said. Jade stepped beside her, hesitant. "Who?" Clara's voice was even. "My father." Jade looked into the mirror. This time, it did not distort. It showed exactly what was there: Jade, Clara, the hallway behind them. And then the hallway in the mirror darkened. The walls peeled back. The floor fractured like old glass. A figure emerged, not monstrous, not grotesque, but hollow. A man-shaped space where light bent strangely. A presence trying to remember how to be human. And in that figure, Jade saw what Victoria must have seen for years. A man who had bartered with something ancient, unknowable. A man who had promised his firstborn as collateral. Clara reached for Jade's hand. "It's not about fear," she said. "It's about remembrance." And then Jade understood. The entity didn't feed on fear. It fed on memory, on acknowledgement. It wasn't haunting them. It was trying to complete something unfinished. And Clara, gifted and cursed in equal measure, was the tether. A child born into a debt not hers, carrying a legacy older than language. Victoria entered then, her face pale but resolved. She held a key, not to a room, but to the mirror itself. Jade knew instinctively what it was. The final seal. "We can end it tonight," Victoria said. "But someone has to stay. Someone it can anchor to." Jade looked at Clara. The girl's eyes were clear, steady, unafraid. "No," Jade said, stepping forward. "She's not the one who made the promise." The mirror pulsed. The air vibrated with a low, hungry hum. Victoria hesitated. "It was never supposed to be you." Jade shook her head. "It always was."
I just didn't know until now.
She took the key. Clara didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. Jade turned the key inside the back of the mirror, and the glass began to melt like ice in the sun. The figure behind it leaned forward, its faceless shape shimmering. Jade didn't step back. She remembered everything. The interview, the touch of Clara's hand, the first knock at her door. And she understood now that she hadn't been chosen. She had been called. As the mirror pulled inward and the world around her bent like water, she thought of only one thing. If she could hold the memory, keep it pure, keep it whole, then Clara would be free. Then the house would sleep again. The mirror sealed itself with a soft click. And for the first time since Jade arrived, the house was truly quiet. The house changed after the mirror sealed. Not in dramatic ways. There were no cracks mending themselves, no sudden warmth surging through the floorboards, no cinematic moments of restoration. But the silence shifted, from a suffocating stillness to something gentler, more expectant, as if the house itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Jade was gone. At least, in the way one understands presence. There was no body to bury, no blood, no violence. Only the mirror, now dulled and ordinary, leaning quietly in the study. Victoria had wanted to cover it again, but Clara had stopped her. "She's not trapped," she had said, placing her hand gently on the glass. "She's watching." Victoria didn't argue. She had aged in days what others might in years. Her voice carried a brittle grace, like something cracked that refused to break. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to bloom in small, almost imperceptible ways. She started humming again, different melodies, lighter ones, not the dissonant lullabies that once echoed down the hallways. She ate more. She laughed, though only sometimes, and only when she thought no one was listening. The drawings changed too. Gone were the spirals and hollow eyes. Instead, she drew windows, wide, open ones with light spilling through, trees with reaching arms. Once, she handed Victoria a picture of 3 figures standing under a sky that was just a little too bright to be natural. Victoria had asked softly, "Who's that with us?" Clara had simply said, "She didn't disappear. She became." Victoria hadn't cried in front of Clara since the night Jade turned the key. But that moment undid her. For all the horror, the house now felt less like a place of containment and more like a vessel slowly remembering how to be a home. The lights no longer flickered without cause. The mirrors reflected only what was truly there. And the air, once heavy with unseen weight, now carried the faint scent of cedar, lemon, sometimes rose, Jade's perfume, which Clara swore still lingered in the library. But healing, Victoria learned, was not about forgetting. It was about naming. She began reading Jade's journal, the one she left locked in her suitcase. It was filled with observations, yes, but more than that, with questions.
Doubts.
Hopes. She had written about Clara with a depth no therapist or teacher had ever managed. Not clinically, but intimately, as if every strange behavior were a language she was learning to speak. "She's not broken," one entry read. "She's just listening to music the rest of us forgot how to hear." Victoria started writing too. Not in journals, but in letters. Some to Jade. Some to herself. Others to Nathaniel, though she never signed those. It was a form of confession, not seeking forgiveness, but recognition. For the pact, for the silence, for the way love had once made her blind to consequence. And still the house listened. On one particular night, months later, Clara woke from a dream and walked to the study. Victoria followed, wordlessly. The mirror stood still. Clara touched it again. "It's fading," she said. "She's not gone, but she's not stuck either. She's somewhere better." Victoria knelt beside her. "How do you know?"
Clara smiled, gently.
"Because I don't feel watched anymore. I just feel safe." Victoria nodded. That was enough. In time, they opened the house. Not to guests, not to strangers, but to light. They let the windows breathe. They repainted walls once stained with shadows. Victoria planted a garden, simple things. Herbs, lavender, jasmine. Clara helped. They called it Jade's Corner. The house didn't forget what it had been, but it learned how to become something else. Sometimes, when Clara passed the library, she would stop. The room still smelled faintly of paper, and something older, something kind. If she listened closely, she could almost hear the soft rustle of pages turning, as if someone were reading just beyond the edge of vision. "She's still teaching," Clara would whisper. And she was. Healing, after all, wasn't about closure. It was about continuance. About carrying the ones we lose forward in ways that change us. Not into victims, not into martyrs, but into something fuller. Something more human. And the house, once a monument to grief and silence, became a space of memory. Not haunted, but held. The house had changed, but not in a way that demanded to be noticed. It no longer whispered in the corners or hummed with tension beneath the floorboards. Instead, it had grown quiet in a different way, a silence that felt like permission, not repression. A silence earned. Clara no longer asked about the mirror. Not because she forgot, but because memory had become a part of her daily rhythm. Some days she painted, bolder colors now, and forms less abstract. Faces returned to her canvas. Some imagined, others remembered, and one that lingered in soft outlines and half-sketched smiles. Jade's, though she never signed it with a name. Victoria took comfort in the unspoken presence of her. She had always struggled with absolutes, with closure. It had once seemed easier to hide behind discipline, intellectualism, certainty, to bury the spiritual in the language of psychology and rational grief. But after Jade, that armor softened. Now she understood that not everything survived through clarity. Some things, people, promises, sacrifices, endured through feeling, through resonance, through the quiet conviction that love, once given honestly, didn't need a physical body to remain alive. In the late spring, Clara asked to go to the sea. Victoria had not taken her in years. Travel used to be too risky, too unpredictable, too full of strangers and variables she couldn't control. But now, Clara's request wasn't made from impulse. It was rooted, intentional. She stood calmly with her small overnight bag, her sketchbook under one arm, and simply said, "I think I want to see something bigger than the house." And so they went. The ocean was still cold that time of year, but Clara didn't seem to mind. She stood barefoot at the edge of the tide, the waves lapping over her toes. Victoria stayed behind on the sand, watching. Something about the way Clara tilted her head reminded her so much of Jade, attentive, open, as though the world were always speaking and all one needed to do was listen properly. "Do you think she's still with us?" Victoria asked as they walked back up the shore. Clara didn't answer immediately. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small stone, one she'd found by the water's edge. Smooth, dark oval. She held it out to Victoria, like an offering. "She is," she said, "but not like before." Victoria turned the stone over in her hand. It was warm, somehow, despite the cool breeze. "She's not watching," Clara continued. "She's resting. Because she knows we're okay." Victoria didn't ask how Clara knew.
She didn't need to.
There were things that went beyond knowing, and somehow Clara had always lived closest to that edge. When they returned home, the house no longer felt like a place that needed guarding. It didn't feel fragile. It felt lived in.
Trusted.
It had become a shelter, not a secret. There were still moments of pain. Grief does not surrender so easily. There were days when Victoria would find herself standing in the hallway outside Jade's old room, forgetting for a heartbeat that no one lived there anymore. Sometimes Clara would wake from dreams that left her shaken and silent for hours. But neither of them ran from these moments. They met them, sat with them, let them pass through like weather. Love had changed them all, and grief, when faced fully, had not hollowed them, it had honed them, made them clearer, gentler, and infinitely more aware of the things that truly mattered. And so life, unceremoniously, went on. Victoria began consulting again, quietly this time, with a focus not on curing, but on witnessing. She didn't tell her new clients about the house, or the mirror, or Jade. But her voice carried something new, an honesty that people responded to. She didn't speak in certainties. She spoke in truths earned the hard way. Clara enrolled in an arts program. Not full-time, not yet. Just weekend workshops, short exhibitions, gentle nudges into the world. Her instructors noted her silence, her stillness, but also her vision. She doesn't draw what she sees, one of them wrote. She draws why she sees it. Victoria kept the mirror. Not in the basement, nor locked away. It stood now in the sunroom, near the garden, beneath the hanging ferns and jasmine vines. Visitors thought it was a decorative piece. Clara never corrected them. Sometimes she would place her hand on the frame in passing. Just a second. Just enough. And if, on quiet evenings, the air shifted just slightly around that mirror, if the light caught its edges in a way that felt too precise, too knowing, no one mentioned it. They didn't have to. The house no longer needed to explain itself. It had been haunted, yes. But more than that, it had been healing. Not just for the living, but for what was left behind. For memory. For legacy. For the impossible, necessary act of choosing love again after loss. And that, in the end, was its final truth. Us how to live.